Welcome to another VeVe Digital Collectibles Breakdown video. I'm Corey with VeVe, and I'm super stoked for today's drop because our friends at the United States Postal Service are releasing the first in a whole series of drops, focusing on the immensely historic 1938 presidential series, which philatelists and stamp collectors affectionately refer to as the Prexies. And better even, each one of the series release is going to sport airdrops to reward those of you who collect. And if you are new to VeVe and stamp collecting, welcome to our collecting community, and don't worry, we're going to talk about all of the stamps and the history of the 1938 presidential series. But first, let's go over those drop details. The USPS 1938 Presidential Series 1 will be releasing on Saturday, June 3rd at 8 a.m. Pacific Time. This blind box release has a price of 6 gems, and it features some of the most historic figures and presidents of the era. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt suggested to the Post Office Department to release a new series of presidential stamps, and these would honor past presidents. This wasn't surprising, as President Franklin D. Roosevelt was a champion for stamp collectors. As a polio-stricken adult, Roosevelt had limited mobility. Stamps for him were a gateway to viewing the world, despite being bound to a wheelchair. In many ways, Roosevelt was the face of philately for the era. Also, it had been years since the last major release of stamps, and that was the series of 1922. A new series was desperately needed, and Roosevelt had come up with the idea for stamps featuring U.S. presidents. To find unique designs for the first stamp in the series, George Washington, the Post Office Department launched a national competition in 1937. The competition to design the stamps would open to the public with a prize of $500 to be awarded to the winner. And that's a little more than $10,000 today when we adjust for inflation. More than 1,000 entries would be counted. Based out of New York, still in her early 20s, and a former student of the National Academy of Design, Elaine Rawlinson would emerge victorious. Uniquely, she was the only female applicant. Elaine's design of George Washington's side profile, which was lauded for its detail and simplicity, clutched this victory. And with that, Elaine Rawlinson would become the first female stamp designer in U.S. history. Ultimately, this series of stamps would remain in use for decades. The 32 stamps featured the likenesses of 29 presidents, 12 of whom had never appeared on a U.S. postage stamp before. And to put the VeVe and USPS stamp art release into perspective in terms of numbers issued, each and every stamp in the original Prexies series printed millions and sometimes billions of copies. Despite this high number of production, due to the history, this series of stamps remains highly sought after today and is a must-have addition to any collector focusing on U.S. stamps. Let's take a deeper look at the history of each one of the stamps that's releasing in this Series 1. First, we have the 1/2 cent Benjamin Franklin stamp art, coming in as a common and minting 4,800 editions. We started off with one of the unique exceptions in this collection, as Benjamin Franklin was not a president of the United States. However, all you stamp lovers will know Franklin served as the very first Postmaster General of the United States, and so it makes sense to see his likeness on this very first stamp in the series. Next, we have the 1 cent George Washington, coming in as a common and minting 4,800 editions. This stamp art, after what we talked about earlier, should have some special meaning, as this was the bust of George Washington that Elaine Rawlinson submitted, which led to the creation of this whole series. George Washington, the first president of the United States and founding father, has appeared on more U.S. stamps than any other individual in American history. The 1.5 cent Martha Washington stamp art is coming in as an uncommon and minting 3,800 editions. Another anomaly amongst the collection of original stamps. Martha Washington was one of the 3 non-presidents in the series. This likeness of Martha Washington came from a marble bust, which was on display in the Memorial Continental Hall Museum. The very first First Lady and wife of George Washington, Martha Washington is an iconic figure in U.S. history. Next, the 2 cent Adams stamp art is coming in as an uncommon and minting 3,800 editions. This gorgeous rose-colored stamp art features the bust of John Adams, who took over presidency after George Washington. The portrait depicted is of the Daniel Chester French's marble bust of Adams. Adams achieved received his presidency by narrowly defeating his arch-rival Thomas Jefferson to become the second U.S. president. The first rare of the series is the 3-cent Thomas Jefferson stamp art, which is minting 2,800 editions. The original stamp printed more than 130 billion copies, eclipsing the print numbers of all the others. Jefferson took office after his bitter rival John Adams, and the two would later die on the same exact day, July 4th of 1826. Adams's last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." But in a twist of dark irony, Jefferson had beat him yet again, dying just a few hours before him. Next, the 4-cent James Madison stamp art is coming in as a rare and minting 2,800 editions. This original red-violet stamp highlighted the man who was considered the father of the Constitution. James Madison, the 4th president of the United States, was attributed with planning and creating the checks and balances that were essential to the functioning of the U.S. government. Initially, this stamp didn't find much use as it exceeded the standard 2 cents per ounce rate of postage for letters. But later, the postage rate would double, and this stamp became more widely utilized. Finally, the 5-cent James Monroe stamp art is coming in as an ultra-rare and minting 1,817 editions. Featuring the 5th president of the United States, James Monroe, the likeness seen was taken from a medal furnished by the U.S. Mint. The 5-cent Monroe was produced both as a sheet and as a horizontal coil between the years of 1938 and 1939. And for all of you who hold all the stamps in this Series 1 release, you'll be awarded the secret rare 4.5-cent White House stamp art. This piece uniquely is the only one that doesn't depict a person. Instead, we see the green-gray depiction of the White House. The Irish-born architect James Hoban won the privilege of designing the presidential mansion in a contest held in 1792 by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. It would be burnt to the ground in the War of 1812, and Hoban would return to rebuild it. And that's a wrap for this breakdown video. I love getting to talk about stamps and history with all of you, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this collection releasing on VeVe so we can continue this conversation. Best of luck if you decide to go for this one, and until the next breakdown video, keep learning, sharing, and collecting what you love. This is Corey with VeVe, signing off.